Okay, so thank you again for joining us to our program, Defunding the Police, a discussion with elected women of color. I'm Tatiana Swancy, a Restorative Practices Coordinator with Oak Park Public Library. And tonight is a part of a wide-ranging series the library has been coordinating on anti-racism and restorative practices. Last month, the library co-presented a program on the history of early Black residents in Oak Park. In February, we presented a program with Black artists and performers on Black Joy, and we are currently working on a program for the near future that will focus on the prison abolition movement and mass incarceration. We also have a number of anti-racism book and media discussions, including a partnership with the Chicago Public Library Austin branch called the Anti-Racist Book Group. And you can find out more about all of these programming and initiatives at our website, oppl.org/antiracism. And many of our larger programs, like tonight, are recorded and uploaded to the library's YouTube channel. So thank you again for joining us. I'm very excited about tonight. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Adam Paradis.
Yeah, hi, I'm Adam Paradis. I just want to say welcome to everyone for the discussion tonight. I'm really excited about the programming the library has been doing for the past year, but especially tonight. So I'm glad everybody is taking the time out to talk about these issues for our communities here in Cook County. It's great. So I want to introduce myself. My name is Adam Paradis. I'm a library assistant here at Oak Park Public Library, as well as a community organizer, Cook County and Oak Park. I'll be facilitating the discussion with some questions that we've pulled for the evening. So I'm very excited to discuss defund and abolition and the spectrum there with these two women. And I'm eager to learn from the panelists. I'm sure you all are. So let me introduce them now. We don't have a lot of time and we have a lot of ground to cover. So first is alderwoman Cicely Fleming of Evanston's 9th Ward. She's a dedicated community advocate and a founding member of the Organization for Positive Action and Leadership, OPAL, a group committed to promoting equity in government. Fleming has served the community as a PTA president, a member of Evanston's mental health board, and a volunteer at Connections for the Homeless. She holds a master's degree in public administration from DePaul University with academic and personal interests in policy development and analysis, asset-based community development, voter engagement and mobilization, and racial equity in government. So thank you for being here. And up next, Arti Walker-Peddakotla is serving a 4-year term as an Oak Park trustee. She's a community organizer and policy strategist. In addition to her work as an elected official, Arti works as an engineering and production manager in tech, the founder and community organizer for Freedom to Thrive in Oak Park, and organizes with multiple progressive groups focused on fighting back against Hindu supremacy, the military-industrial complex, and fighting for immigrant and refugee rights. Arti is a former microbiologist and US Army veteran. Arti has been featured in the New York Times, Crime and Dreams Newsweek, and Chicago Tribune. So thank you both for taking the time out of your busy schedules to spend time with us this evening and talk about defunding the police in Oak Park and Evanston and beyond, what that might look like. A quick note about the format before we begin. So the library has pooled questions to guide this discussion, and we'll have some time at the end for audience questions that we'll sort of, take care of at the end of our discussion. So let's get to it. Are you all, everyone ready?
Adam, can I add one thing?
Sure.
People are welcome to use the chat feature. Only the panelists will see the questions, and we'll get to what we can in the last portion of the program.
So to begin, so how would you, both of you, as elected officials, but also strong members of your community, how would you sort of characterize your role in defund and the defund movements? And how did you come to believe that Evanston, in Cicely's case, and Oak Park, in Arti's case, they need or defund would be suitable for these communities?
Do you want to go first, Arti?
No, you go ahead. You're like the guest. You're from Evanston. I live here.
Well, thanks for having me, to Arti and Adam and Tatiana. So Adam, repeat the question. I'm sorry, I was trying to capture it all.
Two things. How would you characterize your role in defund?
Okay.
And as an elected person, And also, how do you come to find that defund was the right fit for Evanston, or Evanston was right for Evanston?
Okay, I'm going to start with the latter. So I would not say that I came to know anything. Really, this movement has been well before I started talking about it from my current seat. And really, in Evanston came about after most Americans who usually miss these kind of things was forced to watch the murder of many people while we were stuck home during the pandemic. So as we saw around the world and here in Evanston, young people really started to kind of take to the streets and really demand something different, which was well beyond time to happen. So we had a similar movement here in Evanston with lots of students who were home and paying attention and very frustrated. And so they really started the push here in Evanston. And then as my job as an elected official, I need to respond to my constituents and the citizens. And, that push gained a lot of momentum here. Definitely was something I had been aware of and was thinking about, maybe not to the point of defund, but really towards like looking at our police accountability, which, is not strong like it is not other places. And so when the defund language and movement kind of started coming, I was fortunate to have a lot of people around me who really are, abolitionists. They don't believe in police at all. And so learning from them was able to kind of start making the point from my role in city council. And so my role in city council is just that, representing my community. And obviously I am the one who's fiscally responsible for passing the budget. I don't do direct hiring. That's our city manager's responsibility. But I do manage the city manager and still started kind of pushing towards what can we do to get us to the defund. Most of my peers were not necessarily interested in defunding. Lots of feelings around the term defunding, right? Lots of imagining and reimagining and refund, not refunding, reallocation and so on and so forth. But for me, I said we have to push harder than that. We've done those things for many of years. So that is my role on city council, really, is to speak for and advocate for what the citizens want. And so made a statement about defunding and started talking about it through our city budget. We did not really do anything significant at all at this point, but my role is really to speak up and bring those things forward that my citizens are looking for, and then advocate for them on my side, although I am one of 9 votes there.
Thank you. Arti, for you?
Yeah, if I remember the question correctly, I think very much like Cicely, I didn't come into office like thinking, we need to defund the police and about abolition. It was only after I started meeting with constituents and really royal organizers. So people in Oak Park know that there's this amazing youth group, Black and Latinx led youth group called the Revolutionary Oak Park Youth Action League, or Royal. And I started hearing from them about the fact that they kept on getting stopped disproportionately by police. And they were sick of it. And they've been protesting about this well before I got into office in 2019. They had their very first walkout, I believe, in 2018, where they walked out of school and went to Village Hall on the anniversary of Trayvon Martin's murder. And they've done that every year since 2018. And so when I started hearing about this, and when I realized that there was resistance at the village board in talking about these issues, like, I remember my very first meeting where I brought up the fact that I thought we had a racial profiling problem in Oak Park Police, which was back in 2019. One of the now former board members said, well, you're maligning the entire police department. How dare you say those things? Like, our police are great. And I realized that this conversation was not likely to go anywhere with our former village board. And we just swore in new members of our village board on Monday. So it's kind of weird to say our former village board. And that is why I got together with a group of people that were already actually doing research on policing in Oak Park, and we started Freedom to Thrive Oak Park. And it's really being rooted in that community group that made me realize, like, okay, the systems of public safety that we've been born and raised to believe keep us safe actually don't keep us safe. In fact, they harm people. They harm Black people disproportionately in Oak Park, and Latinx people, and they really don't respond. Like, police don't actually stop crime, they respond to crime. and it requires you to really challenge, your thinking about all of the things you've been brought up to believe. So my role with the last village board was to try and push through policies I knew weren't going to get anywhere, but maybe shift the Overton window a little bit. And I think we've done that. With the new village board, I'm hoping that we have, and I believe we do have a village board that is at least willing to have a conversation about these issues. And I'm really excited about the potential for bringing these conversations and having just real conversations rooted in actual facts and logic instead of the fear-based response that we saw from previous village board members.
Thank you both for that. And I want to cut to the hard question is both of you, we can start with Arti because she's just went. Do you have a working definition of defund or abolition? Defund, because we're talking mostly about municipal budgets here. And how has it changed since, I initially wanted to say since your time in office, but how has it changed in the past year, in the past 12 months, seeing what we've seen, Cicely points out?
Yeah, so, what I'll point to, my working definition of defund is divesting from the police and reinvesting that money in social services. If you look at Oak Park's police budget, and I'm looking at like a chart that I have like off to the side here, in 2020, our municipal budget for police was over $25 million. If you look at what it was in 2010, it was $17 million. If you look at the rate of growth of our police budget and compare it to what the village of Oak Park, and yes, we have other governmental bodies in Oak Park that do have social services, but if you just look at the village of Oak Park government, which is the board I serve on, you'll see that the rate of spending or the rate of funding the police is just astronomical, exponential compared to what we spend on social services. So like affordable housing, public health, those sorts of things, which is what the Village of Oak Park government actually controls. And so for me, it's like, okay, what can we do differently in our response to public health issues? So like mental health calls, homelessness calls, some minor domestic disputes that may not require armed police officers to respond. Can we respond to those calls differently? Can we stopping youth, Black youth predominantly? Like Freedom to Thrive has, Oak Park has data showing that 95% of the youth that were stopped in Oak Park were Black, and we should not be okay with that. So can we stop doing that? Like, can we reduce the scope of interactions between police and the public and stop the surveillance state that we currently have on Black and Latinx people in Oak Park? So that is my definition of defunding the police.
And probably mine is similar, and I think that the defund word, as I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of people, equate that with abolition, right? And they're two different terms. And so when my peers or people in Evanston think about defunding, they think, you're bringing it down to a zero balance, which would be not having a police department, which I think is a viable conversation, but not the one that we're having. And so when we got kind of past the fear of the word defunding, we got to that kind of reimagine and all these other words that people threw out. And I think that some people would tell you in Evanston that we accomplished that because we did get rid of, I think, 9 vacant police positions. Now, it's important to know that there were 9 positions that we had vacant, and our city, functioned pretty well without those, either 9 or 11, I can't remember the exact number. We functioned okay without those 9 or 11 officers, but that money did not go to anything else that was going to help the community. It just went back into our, general fund balance. We did eliminate 2 positions that we are now using those funds to create an alternative response model, which would be this mental health response model that the committee we're still meeting as a committee. We've gone out, our RFP actually went out today to look for a service provider for 4 staff who would go out to respond to those, as Arti said, non-kind of police calls. However, I think there's still people who then feel like that we have defunded the police, then we're making this other model. But the other model is only funded at $200,000, and our police department is still funded at $40 million. And so it's still very uneven. And when we look at police costs for service, as we all know, there are a lot of times disproportionate African-American, but so many of our calls here in Evanston are not even police matters. but people don't know or don't think that they have another option. So if their neighbor's playing music too loud, that becomes a 911 call. And, I've talked to some of our officers who are just as frustrated by that because they say, look, we get there and it's really not a police matter, right? It's really a neighbor dispute or it's really a noise issue, but it's not a police matter. And so we do have officers here who are frustrated by the kind of overuse of their department. But part of that is a societal issue in that we have not provided our citizens anything else. And we've really been, in America, kind of taught to believe that the police are kind of the all-time problem solvers, right? And so it becomes a thing where, unfortunately, even during the pandemic, I had people who were calling the police when people were walking down the streets in groups and they didn't have a mask, and they were calling 911 for that, right? And so when I tell people about defunding, it's like it's the police for sure, and it's the amount of money, $40 million, compared to this $200,000, when we know mental health calls are on the rise and need for help in mental health. But it's also a little bit of defunding our minds and how we use police and why we think as a society the police are worth $40 million and mental health services are only worth, $200,000. So for me, it's kind of the conversation I'm trying to have around the police and the police funding, but it's also around our dependence, or what we think is our dependence on policing.
Those are, yeah, very compelling points. So in your view, Cicely, what then would be the purview of police in society or in Evanston, in your community?
Right. So I think that everyone goes to the extreme. It's like, what if my house is broken into and the armed robber, don't we need a police officer, right? And so, I think that's a valid concern that people have. I don't want anyone to be unsafe, whether it's, an armed robbery or it's just you need, medical support from our paramedic. I don't want anyone to be in an unsafe community. But then that leads me to the next question. What is safety, right? Safety for me is not the same thing as safety for you. And so in our ward, we had a lot of conversations during COVID when we had a lot of time to talk about community safety. And most people agreed once we had conversations that, the police, I think in our mind, give us an illusion of safety. But the fact of the matter is, if someone breaks into my house, there's a high chance the police won't make it here before that person leaves and before I'm harmed, right? And so the other part of that is that, why is that person breaking into my home? Are they undereducated? Are they underemployed? Do they have a substance abuse problem? Do they not feel part of the community? And so how can we build community with each other? And so ideally people aren't left out of community and are cared for. And then they don't feel like they want to break into my home because they know who I am. Right. And then how can we, if we see someone doing that, how can we respond in a different way as a community with the correct services and supports and encouragement, resident to resident, so then again, that person is brought into the community. Because most of the time, if you have someone breaking into your home or committing some violent crime about you, it's not your neighbor next door because they know you, right? You have some kind of relationship with them. And so we're trying to do a lot of intentional community building, and even looking at block clubs, right? Block clubs are usually started as kind of a crime watch, crime prevention. And so in my ward, we decided not to go with block clubs because we want to be a welcoming community. So there's a difference between going out and seeing someone who you don't recognize and saying, hey, welcome to our neighborhood, welcome to our street, welcome to the community, versus I see somebody I don't know, I'm going to call the police on them because they must be up to no good. And so I think the police, unfortunately, we have violence in our community, but that's a whole long story about why we have violence. And as long as we do have these violent things, particularly how the media portrays them, people probably think we need police. But if we can think about the person committing the crimes and why they are and what we can do to stop those, I think we can start to think about how we don't need a police with a gun to respond to that.
Anything to add there, Arti?
Yeah, I have a lot to add there, and I'm sorry if you hear my kids screaming in the background, but
Mine are probably screaming too.
I tried to tell them to be quiet, and that only lasts for like 20 minutes. I think the thing that's on top of mind for me, one thing you didn't mention about like me currently is I'm a part-time law student currently, and I actually have my law exams on Saturday and Sunday, and I'm in criminal law right now. And I have loved learning about criminal law and its history, and the sort of how criminal law, how we came to define crimes the way we've come to define them in the United States. One of the things that, one of the two of the cases that stand out in my mind as Cicely was talking about, like, understanding why is that person committing the crime? like the Supreme Court has heard so many cases, but one of the most important cases that we talked about in criminal law was Robinson and Powell. There were two cases where we talked about how drug crimes and alcohol crimes are treated as status offenses. So instead of actually, you know, criminalizing drug and alcohol use, we're criminalizing that person that is an alcoholic and not actually treating them for who they are. Like, why is it that, you know, that instead of actually looking at that person and saying, how can we help you? We are saying, let's put you in jail because we think that's a better way of treating drug addiction and alcohol addiction. And so crimes in the United States, like when we talk about the carceral state and the police state, it has been created as a way of social and political control of Black people, poor people, and people of color in the United States. Like that, those are just facts. Like my criminal law professor started the semester saying, we are all criminals. Only some of us get caught. Only some of us are surveilled. And the people that are surveilled in Oak Park, as Kevin Barnhart like wrote on Freedom to Thrive, Oak Park's blog, is Black people. The color of suspicion in Oak Park is Black. And so I've seen it with my own eyes where people will call, you know, white people will call the police on Black kids playing in the playground in Oak Park. Why do we have armed police officers? First of all, why are we responding to that call in the first place? But like, two, why are armed police officers coming out to the playground and responding to that? Like, we should just shut that down and we should be like, lady, calm down. Those kids are not going to hurt you. We're not sending anybody out, right? But that's what we do in Oak Park. And so I think as Cicely talked about, like we need to reframe our like what we think about of crime in our minds and go against the grain and talk about like, how can we help people that are hurting right now? And that's really what I want us to get to in Oak Park.
Yeah, I think the reframing is, that really important. Do you have, and one of the common ways of reframing just criminality or crime in the literature of abolitionists and people doing the work, predominantly Black women of color, is talking about antisocial behavior and responses to antisocial behavior. So it's not just the moral depravity of the alcoholic, it's, well, the society can't really attend to this and so on. How can a municipality attend to the reframing of your constituents or the residents of your municipality? How can the municipality get people to think and reframe how, one, they interact with the police, but also thinking about these as social ills that we all need to work on? Cicely, you pointed to building community rather than creating barriers or more surveillance. But how can a municipality do that in like concrete terms?
Right, well, we are the lawmakers for our municipalities. And so Evanston had a committee of city council members. It started right when I came in. I started my first term. So when I came in, I started my second term, but when I came in my first term, and it really came because we have all of these, you know, city ordinances, code violations, and a lot of, you know, state laws in which our police respond to. And so, I mean, there were really small things like stealing something, I think it was $25 or more, you know, the police could arrest you for, right? And a lot of times that was juveniles. And you know, if the police were called, and then, you know, they have discretion, but they can arrest people. And then that takes you to the Cook County Courthouse. And then that starts a whole system of you having a record and whatever. And so there was a decision made after some conversation, like, what are some of these really small, you know, quote unquote crimes that really we don't see as crimes, right? They started probably long ago, and we don't always revisit things as a municipality. We make these rules and we don't always revisit them years later. And so we were able to pull back so many things, you know, drinking in public or, you know, not drinking in public necessarily, so we don't arrest people for that. But if you're, you know, if you're drunk, and we have a college town, right? So we have college kids who are drunk all the time who, you know, our police have the ability to arrest. But I think, again, some of our police officers will tell you that's just not a good use of our time. It's not worth it. We understand these are kids. And so we were able to make a lot of those things either not violations or city violations, which meant you get a city ticket and you'd have to come to the city of Evanston, you know, administrative adjudication. And then we made rules that say that if you're a youth, you have to go to, you know, community service. We offer you therapy. We offer you, you know, whatever kind of support you need. There will be a social worker assigned to you. And so we were able to do those things. It took a little time, but, you know, we were able to take a lot of those really small violations that were starting kind of a criminal record for youth and say, let's handle them in-house, right? And so it's almost like a family saying, we're going to take care of this internally. And so with the support of lots of social service agencies, as well as, city council, we were able to do a lot of that stuff. And it just makes the system, now it had some kinks in it, obviously, but those are the kind of things we can do in municipality. It takes some time, but if we look at, there's state jurisdiction, but then there's always local jurisdiction. If we look at what we control locally and we decide, hey, we're going to wipe the record of all these things, we're going to do these things in-house, or we're going to handle them a different way, particularly here in Evanston, that saves so much kind of pain and trauma for our young people who just make, bad choices as we all did, but they can handle that. We can handle that in-house. They can be referred for therapy. They can be referred for support. We can get them a job in the summer through our youth job program, as opposed to them getting a record down at the county and having to, get started in a huge system. So the state should be doing that as well, but every municipality, as Arti says, just our history of crime and punishment is, the slaves were free, but then they were unemployed. They had no land, they had no money. And then it was made to be illegal to stand on the corner of 3 or more together, which we still have 3 or more together laws, right? And so we make these laws, we don't revisit them as lawmakers, and they just kind of comes the way it is, as Arti, most of it is based on, class or race.
Yeah, do you want to take a stab at the question, Arti, or?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. What can the municipality do to reframe sort of crimes and moral statements about people's behavior as sort of unchanging, and reframe it as, conflict resolution or antisocial behavior, and what the municipality can do there?
Yeah, I would say don't do what the last board did. Don't do what the last board did, which was create a fear-mongering response to defunding the police, which is all about, oh my God, crime is growing up and we need police. And, if we don't have police, crime is just, people are just going to go crazy, and we're going to see criminals everywhere in the streets, and, you're not safe. Like, don't do that. First and foremost, I think honestly, being an elected official, I think, is hard. And I see this far too often in elected officials, that we think we know what's best for our community, and we're often unwilling to listen and have just really hard and kind of humbling conversations with community organizers that are like, you're doing it wrong and you need to be doing it this way. And oftentimes what I see in elected officials is this knee-jerk response of, no, I do know better because people elected me to be here. And therefore, like, I do know something about this, and I bring something to the table, and my view matters. And it's like, but does it really though? Like, in this conversation, does your view and like your lens of policing, which is often a white lens where you haven't actually interacted with the police on a daily basis, does that really matter in this conversation? And and this is hard to hear for a lot of people, especially elected officials that have, a bit of a, ego present, right? Is that your view in this case actually doesn't matter. What matters is the people that are feeling pain from being surveilled by the police. That's the view that matters. And so that's the lens we need to govern through. And that's what I would say municipal officials need to do.
Well, but do either of you have any advice on how you or your colleagues on city council or the board can be better held accountable in these matters? Anybody?
Oh, that's a big question. So with the accountability pieces, they need to be voted out of office, right? But the other piece of that is we have to have people run for office. And in Evanston, it's not, it has historically been a job for older retiree or wealthy people, because, we make a stipend that's $15,000, yet the citizen base, demands 80 hours of your week. And so it's not really a job that's set up for people to do who, need the money or you don't have the time. And so that's been unfortunate. But I think if we look at municipal elections all over, they're, pretty low turnout. I tell people this all the time because I was one who went to city council, which is city council will wait you out. We're here for 4 years. We're here, every other Monday. And we pretty much know or make the assumption that people are going to come for their issue when they're hot and heavy, and they're going to come a few times and then they're going to die out, because it's a lot of energy and a lot of work to change you know, municipal boards. But I mean, it's possible, but it's not necessarily the most rewarding way to spend your time. And so I think the accountability is really people have to follow what their elected is doing or not doing. And then when it comes time to vote, you have to have a candidate who's ready to run, and you have to try to get the person out of office. Being in Illinois, we don't have term limits. And so my colleague just was voted out. She was here for 32 years. This is a super small town to be in for 32 years. But I have another colleague who won election. And so she is going into her 2030 or something ridiculous, right? But the momentum was on one side to vote one out and not on the other. And so I think it's a super hard thing to do. And I tell people honestly all the time that, my peers know that you are going to go away eventually because you're going to get tired. And it's just not a system, unfortunately, that's really set up to represent people who don't agree, as Arti said, who don't agree with an elected official. It's totally backwards. I can tell you, I'm in the system. I'm like Arti. This is why she and I are friends. I've been here, for 4 years, and it has been the most frustrating job I've ever had. And I had at one point 3 children under 3, but I lose almost every vote on city council. I'm pretty much, kind of the black sheep of the group. But I'm okay with that because I didn't get up here to make friends. So it's not about that for me. But people think, well, you're up there, you can make things happen. And I always say I'm one of 9 votes, and we need 5 to make things happen. And it's almost like anything that I bring up is voted against just for principle that I am seen as being someone who's, kind of rallying up the troops and, and then leading the protest every week. And so it's difficult, but I stick with it. I mean, I'm concerned that other people are not going to come up and want to do it because they're going to see it as a really challenging job. Again, for no real benefit except for that you love your community.
Yeah, I would.
Would you like to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the accountability piece comes, like, my accountability comes because I'm rooted in community. Like, the youth and the organizers that I that I collaborate with, they will tell me, like, oh no, that was a messed up vote. Like, and it's hard to hear that. Like, I think, like, one time on a police station, like, our police station is crumbling, like, not crumbling, but like it has OSHA violations, like, workplace, like, safety violations and stuff. And they're proposing to build a new $40 million police station. And at first I was like, oh, well, maybe we should fix the OSHA violations and, like, we should, fund that. And the youth were like, hang on, like, why are you're not even giving us money to do the things we want or responding to anything that we need, and you're about to respond to something that the police, like, Arti, like, no, it was not that great to hear, but they were right. Like, they were absolutely right on that. And so I think, like, my accountability comes from the fact that I'm rooted in community. And very much like Cicely said, and I've said this to some of the new board members that got elected, I'm not here to make friends. I'm an introvert. I have far too many friends as it is. If I don't get elected as a result of the work that I've done, I'm quite okay with that because my conscience is clear, right? Like, I vote with a clear conscience on, like, the issues that I care about. And, if that means that people don't vote me back into office after 2023, fine.
I only have 2 more questions about municipal stuff because I do want to talk about your views of police reform more broadly. So 2 questions about municipal stuff. One is the defund literature. All these activists and organizers talk about, but they always put forth some aspect of, like, small d democracy, greater participation, not voter suppression, but also, like, it's not just voting necessarily, it's greater participation in the budget. If elections are every 4 years, budgets are every year, right? And so they all demand, especially if you look at defunding vis-a-vis the budget, a greater democratic participation. And so I live in Oak Park, full disclosure. I don't feel very, like, it's really hard to get involved with that sort of municipal process and the budget. So is there anything going on in Evanston and Oak Park, or maybe Oak Park and Evanston can learn from each other here on getting involved in that small d democracy to, one, build community, as we've touched on, but also work to get engaged with the budget at that level.
So despite my title, I will just say that the way that our city government is set up in Evanston, it is not set up for you to participate. It is not really set up for, us to really have a meaningful exchange with you. Kind of, it's set up that at least on Monday at City Council, you come, we give an hour for, 2 people or 8 million people to come and speak to us. We don't engage in conversation with you. There's no response. And we kind of say, okay, thanks for coming. And then we move into our business. There are times when we, the business kind of gets held up because of things that people have come forward to say if they're kind of a louder group of people. But really that exchange needs to come with and Evanston is set up to come with your elected officials. So that's why I can talk a lot about things that are happening in my ward, because I meet with my ward monthly. And coming in May, started my second term. I had a survey out for a few months. They've given me the goals they want me to work on. So we will have a conversation about the goals that I will work on because I work for them. I'm very clear on my role there. But I'm a little bit of an oddity in that way. We have some new elected officials coming in who I think will be similar, and it will be a breath of fresh air for the entire city. But most people, as Arti said, in my experience, feel like, well, I'm here, you're there, I'm making the decisions. In the budget piece, our city clerk actually tried to get us to do participatory budgeting. It did not happen. But I have just made a motion. So we're going to have a new budget committee of city council, because even as a council member, I get a budget update quarterly, maybe a little bit before that. I ask questions. It's like, okay, well, here we answered your questions. Now let's move on with the night. And so even our budget is made by our city manager based on our form of government. There's not much participation even by me. So if you watch or input, I should say. So if you've watched our budget in the last couple of years, it's been a little bit of a disaster in that we are literally critiquing the budget line by line on the floor, which is good for transparency, but it's a kind of a shit show of a meeting because, so I've voted no to, I think, 3 of the 4 budgets since I've been here, because I can't move forward with something that doesn't represent my community. And if I'm, even as an elected official, kind of pigeonholed to having a limited amount of time to critique the budget, then it's not productive. So I think people should be asking for participatory budgeting, at least for some part of the money that's spent. And there should be. I've looked at other cities that have budget committees of the council, sometimes of other members of the of the community, and they're meeting monthly or every other month throughout the year to track the budget and start making modifications to the budget based on what people want. And so when the budget comes forward, it's not kind of this, not great meeting, but when it comes forward, people feel like they've been able to put time in all year, as opposed to what usually happens is we start talking about the budget somewhere in August, September, a light conversation, October, a little heavier, and then we like to pass the budget before Thanksgiving so we can have a vacation. So it's not really set up for the citizens to participate, in my opinion, not the way that it should be. I think having an hour of discussion or having an hour of comment is not citizen engagement, but that is the way I think government has operated for so long. And now that citizens are demanding more, we're seeing that big struggle of government feeling like, hey, this is how we do things. We're the ones who are right. And citizens saying, hey, this isn't working for us.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that because our budget process is very much the same. I don't have a whole lot of say in it. And, the way that the budget is created every year is the department directors will go around, the village manager will go around to the department directors, ask, what is your budget, ask for the upcoming budget. It'll be presented to the village board and we'll go through department by department their ask. It's not a great way of doing it. It's not like the board is saying, hey, we want to see a reduction, or we want to see more money allocated to this, or we want to, it's just a very backwards way of doing it. We do need to get to participatory budgeting, which is not a novel concept. Chicago does it, New York does it, like so many other cities does it. And participatory budgeting is where you take a fraction of the general fund, you allow citizens to engage in a democratic process to then define how they want to allocate that funding. And sometimes it can be as simple as adding a park bench somewhere, or, bus shelters or whatever, things that citizens want that often municipal elected officials don't think about.
I'll just add to that real quick, because the budget piece, even, as Arti described, we as elected officials could do it differently and say, hey, you know what, instead of this kind of, are you the same as last year, you increase or decrease, we can say we want to decrease 20% across the board, right? We can give that direction. We usually don't, or my experience has been that we don't. We could give that direction, or we could say everyone needs to start from a zero and show us what they need, not just repeating last year, but everyone start from zero, and you need to, be able to articulate and defend your position on why you need $4 million or whatever it is, right? And we don't do that. And I have a friend who always says, in government, we spend money like it's monopoly money. And I see that with our school boards. I mean, it's just like people are like, oh, we have this money, but there's not a connection to, and I always say this, there are people who are paying for these services with their tax dollars. And in Evanston, our taxes are ridiculous, as in Oak Park, I imagine. And we don't think about them when we're spending the money. We just act like this money falls from heaven, and it's not that response to community, and it's not that feeling that we are working for community. And these are someone's really hard-earned tax dollars.
And to add, honestly, to add to what Cicely's saying, like when we fail to question the budget, we'll question, like in Oak Park, people will question the spending on social services, but we never ever question the spending on police. It's like, oh no, we need to spend $25 million on police because obviously that's a necessity, and that's never questioned. But we question like the spending on the Oak Park Regional Housing Center or the spending on other, social services. And, like 2 years ago, as very much like Cicely, I voted no on both budgets, something that the village manager actually or the outgoing village president actually talked about in his speech on Monday, which was like, how could you vote no on a budget because you're voting no to all these things? And I have voted no because the budget did not align with my moral values. And I just couldn't bring myself to vote on a budget that once again increased police funding while we failed to help people in a real and meaningful way. So we have to start questioning, like, why are we okay spending this much money on policing every single year and other services that may not have as great of an impact as we need them to have.
I think one of the remarkable things here is that, and this is kind of points to the absurd situation that we're in, is that treating the police department as if it's another line item on a budget really like bristles against the mythology and ideology and apologetics and bad faith arguments that surround these sorts of critical engagement with contemporary policing. Like how dare we treat it as if it were a public department, for example. That's my editorial, but I want to point the conversation, what time we have left, into the tension between defund and the sort of history of reforms. Like people might be okay with a lot of police reforms. They like community policing. They like anti-bias training. They like diverse police forces. Police reforms are common. But they've also been shown by social scientists to be failures. For the most part, people are still getting killed by the state, so for example. So how does defund fit with that, the sort of history of so-called police reform in the United States?
Yeah.
Can you reconcile that tension?
Cicely, can I go first on that? Cool. I think for me, like when I think about like police reform, I grew up in the era, like I remember as a kid, growing up as a child of immigrants, like I was not exposed to America, like, anything about America really. But I remember very clearly Rodney King. And that was my first like lens into police violence, right? And since Rodney King, and even before then, we've been reforming the police forever in America. We've been saying, well, they need more training. Well, we need to have better use of force standards. We need to have no chokeholds, standards. We need to have deadly force standards. We have been doing this for decades, for generations, and yet we still keep on seeing the same problem. So the question then becomes is why are we continuing to do the same thing, proposing the same reforms, when we know that those reforms haven't actually resulted in meaningful change? And we continue to see police violence. As Miriam Kaba has said, police violence is a misnomer because the entire system is violence. Like it's just violence. The system, the criminal justice system, is about enacting violence on people, surveillance on people. And so defund is distinctly different from reform because what we're not saying, what we're saying is like, Use of force standards, great, great, great. Like Oak Park already has them. We actually looked at that. Like that was the one thing the last board was semi-willing to do, was like, be like, oh, we have fine use of force standards, which Freedom of Thrive Oak Park had already looked at and evaluated. Now we're saying like, defund is saying, how can we do this differently? How can we respond to people that are in need and need help and need care and are hurting differently? How can we respond to them humanely so that they actually get the help that they need, so that the government actually plays a role in reducing harm? Because that is what the justice system should be about, is harm reduction and harm prevention, but it is not about those things. That is the role, that is the difference between defund and reform. Reform continues to enact the violence, of the system of policing on Black people. Defund is about reducing that violence by reducing the scope of interactions between citizens and the police, and then actually addressing the harm that the system of America is causing people, and actually the harm that that individual is experiencing.
But Cicely, would you like to comment on that question?
Not a whole lot to add, but was the question defund versus reform?
Are they intention, or are they of a kind, or are they radically diametrically?
I think they're radically different, which is why people are so opposed to defund, right? I mean, again, we had the, when I came into office, I think one of the first lawsuits, or one of the first things I had to pay was a lawsuit we had by a Northwestern student who was profiled, this time by a resident, who took it upon herself to call the police and follow him in her own car until the police were there and able to secure the scene, and arrest him. And this is where people said, oh, at least we have body cameras, we could see it. I don't know how the whole body camera, I'm grateful for them, but do we, again, it's a little bit of the way we're conditioned. And we paid him, I don't know how many millions of dollars, maybe 10. I can't even remember how much we paid him, of which I was not happy to pay him because I have residents who need that $10 million. But if we're at fault, then we need to pay, whatever it is. After that, we did all these reforms of the way we stop people, and how many people can talk at a time at a police stop, and all kind of things. We have went on, to pay many other, lawsuits against our police here in Evanston. So I think that if it was the same as reform, people would not be so up in arms about it. People are willing, as Arti said, to reform all day. But what I say about the reform method or movement is, you can't train a horse to be, a donkey, right? I mean, it doesn't matter how much training you do. This is the system in which they work in. Now, I'm not one to say every police officer is a horrible person and so on and so forth. However, this is the job, this is the system. So even the officers who I know here in Evanston, who are trying to police well, who are trying to establish relationships in the community, who are from here, who care about the community, they still will point out errors in the police system, right? But that is a system that they work in. They still will go to calls and say, I had two bad options to choose from, right? I didn't have an option of calling a social service provider and say, hey, can you come over and get this person, right? I had two options that were not good. And so I think the defund, as Arti has already said, it's really about, this isn't working, right? This isn't working. We have to do something totally different. What do we want for each other? What do we want for our society? And again, I think we have to keep pushing that idea of, why do we think this makes us safe? And I think the reason people are willing to increase police budgets and have all these trainings and whatever else is because we think as long as we're safe, that's due to the police, or at least that the police are deterring us from being harmed. Where really it isn't. I mean, I'd have to have a police officer in front of my house 24 hours a day to hopefully, maybe ensure that I'm not going to be robbed. But I could also just have an ADT sign in front of my house, and that might move people along, right? And so I think we have to think about the way we're conditioned to believe that we are safe. Who keeps us safe? And I think we keep each other safe if we have community and build relationship, right? And we include people, and we make sure we don't have kids who are being treated like crap in our schools and thrown out and everything else. And so the defund method, though, it I think pushes us, or needs to push us to think through, why don't we care about each other? Why is it okay that some people, as Arti said, some crimes are criminalized, crack versus cocaine, or white collar crime versus someone who robs a bank, right? They're both stealing money out of a bank, but they're penalized in two different ways based on who historically has done these crimes, right? So if we don't want to talk about race and class and who makes the laws and, the police, being a response to, the fear of Black people and all those kind of things, we're not going to get to the fun place. But I think particularly in Evanston and maybe Oak Park, we're so busy kind of trying to hold up this narrative of ourselves as being this like racially harmonious, utopia of a place that we can't then, like, we can't bring ourselves to have a conversation to even say like, oh my gosh, there might be racism here. So we have a community group, similar to Failure to Thrive, that is Citizens Network of Protection, that's been around for a bazillion years, who has always been asking police questions, but not until, again, we're all forced to kind of watch all these crimes in the pandemic, that people start paying more attention to them and saying like, hey, they might be onto something. Now, they weren't calling for defunding the police, but they were pushing really hard and continue to about police accountability, which is a whole other piece about that, because no matter how much training we do and body cameras and whatever else, if we're not holding folks responsible, if they don't know, hey, if I fuck up this police stop, I might be fired, then what is their motivation for change, right? I mean, that same thing with elected officials. We're here for 4 years, pretty much, unless something catastrophic happens. So if I don't sit in this seat, or if I'm not convinced that I need to work and represent you and be accountable to my constituents, there's nothing that's going to change me except for an election. This is why you see people going into communities only every 3.5 years to talk to people, because that's when it counts for them. And so if our police know that they can do pretty much almost anything and still have a job, or even be on paid leave while there's an investigation, what is their motivation to change? It's not that, the racial bias training, it's not the body camera, right? It's people have to know that they might lose, they can and they should lose their job if the service level is not adequate. And we haven't even got to that point. And so it's if we can't get there to accountability, true accountability, I don't know how we leap to actually getting rid of an entire system, unless we rewire ourselves to think that we should not be dependent on, the police and a gun and jail as the only way to walk around our community. And then there's the whole idea of what is safe, because for me, a car I don't know being on my street for 3 days, I might not even notice it's there. Lady around the corner might call the police after day 2 because she doesn't recognize the car and it's there for 2 days. And so it's, again, this idea of what's safe to each person, and where does your entitlement fall in that? Because people feel very entitled to what they think of as safety. And that's the measure for them. It should be the measure, therefore, for everyone else. So I don't think I answered your question, but that was my editorial.
I thought it was really good. Just, I know we're running out of time. Are a few questions, but I think it's important to possibly conclude with this, I guess. So Oak Park, Arti, you can probably speak to this a little bit better. There was a resolution put to the board in August that didn't pass. And then there was a referendum put to the voters in April of this year. It didn't pass, but it was also not very well cashed out.
Non-binding resolution, so it's really.
Yes, but it does say something about the community, and like, what do you think needs to happen in Oak Park for the currency? I mean, because defund is current, Oak-Karan. What needs to change in Oak Park how can these discussions take place?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
and how can people get involved in these types of discussions?
Yeah. So great question. Speaking to the referendum, because I get referendum and resolution mixed up, and the referendum that happened in April, I think the results very roughly were like 30% voted yes to defunding, and then 10% abstain, and I can't remember, like it was 60-70%, or no, 60% said no to defunding. I was actually quite excited about those results, because as a community organizer, I'm like, damn, that's 30% more people than I thought were on this. This is great. I think like that referendum was a racist, and in my opinion, a racist and white supremacist referendum that was designed to sway an election and not get certain people elected. Like that's the truth of it. It was put on the ballot by, board members that no longer serve on the board. So we have a whole new board, and I'm, in private conversations, I've actually spoken to all of the new incoming board members since, they've been elected. And each of them seem like they are willing to at least engage in this conversation. So I'm hopeful that the board dynamic around this topic is at least improved. We're going to be a little bit different. And like we may not have, I don't think we have like 7 votes, like a full like board to vote yes on this issue. We may not even have 4 votes. I don't know. What community members need to start doing then is engaging with your board members who you know may or may not be yes or no on this, like where do they stand on this issue, and ask them where they stand on it, and then walk them through your experience, walk them through the data, and say that you're going to hold them accountable. That's what community members need to start doing. Freedom to Thrive Oak Park is just one organization that is working. So if you want to do more research in FOIA, the village government, and do that, great. But like there are other organizations that are talking about these things too in Oak Park. And I think following them, getting involved in those conversations, unlearning what you know about the police state, like those are all really critical things. Like part of I think growth that happens in any community, or change that happens, is both internal and external. So like you have to change internally and unlearn all of the stuff you've learned, and then also push to change externally. I also want to say, like, I know we're at time, but I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer to answer questions. I don't know if Cicely can.
Thank you. Cicely, I want to know where Evanston is. I think we all want to know where Evanston is now, because you mentioned that there's some commitments to engaging the budget and creating mental health crises response models and so on. Where is Evanston now, and do you feel like the commitments are there and they've got teeth, so to speak, and how can Evanstonians get involved?
Yeah, so when we do have this $200,000, again, it's like peanuts, but so I chaired the committee. We've met weekly for the last maybe 6 months. We went to RFP. We're hoping to get a local behavioral health agency to, respond. And then perfect world, our goal is to have folks out responding to calls that come through 911 or 311 or, however they come with the non-police number, to have them out and responding to calls by August. And so, ideally we will have that going. And as we track that data for the next year, we'll be able to kind of make the case to say, hey, this is working, let's increase the budget. That is, kind of fingers crossed, perfect goal. On the other side of that, we still have our police budget that's $40 million, and, lots of other things that people would probably like to have that money spent on. And so this budget committee that I hope to get going pretty soon here of the council will just start to meet with our CFO monthly to talk about the budget. We'll start to look at city council goals, which I will say over the last 4 years, really our city manager has made. So I'm going to ask my peers to actually make the city council goals. And then we can look at those and start looking at these budgets way before they come forward, because as Arti said, they're kind of the same every year, but start looking at them department by department and really looking at the goals of the residents and seeing where we need to move money around. So it's not only the police budget, but it's, Parks and Rec and a variety of places that might have money we need to move around. I mean, during the pandemic, I voted no to this as well, but our city manager brought forward reinstating car allowances for some of our senior staff. Now, this is during the pandemic. Our city hall has been closed since March of 2019. And so most every meeting anyone's taken is on Zoom. And so I said, well, why would we have car allowances when people are not driving? When we had to start a emergency food pantry in Evanston because we didn't have one, and we had 500 people a week coming for food. But it was, the idea that morale for folks needed to be increased. And so, as Arti said, we also have, 4 or 5 new members coming to our city council. So I'm hopeful with some new ideas, we'll be able to push some things. And so as of right now, this is all we have kind of in the queue, but I am hopeful that with the new council, including a new mayor, we will make some larger pushes around the police budget in terms of taking some of that money, at least for this response team that we're going to have out in the streets pretty soon. But for so many other ways in which we don't really do a great job of supporting our youth here, we kind of see that as the school's role. And so I've tried to advocate that they're the city's kids, or not just the school students. And so how can we support them during outside time? And then also so many other ways in which the schools really just can't, support them all the time. And so hopefully we'll be able to move some police money to do those kind of things. There's always the police union that we have to kind of contend with, but I think given the national momentum, I'm hopeful that the union, we don't usually have such a hard push from our police unions. I'm hopeful that we can do some of those things. But I would counter that police and fire are, fire is not necessarily harmful, but I would, say that we look at the fire budget too, right? People always think we have 6 or 5 fire stations in Evanston. We're 7 miles long. And so that's a lot of money. And so, there's a lot of things that we need to look at in our budget, and people can get involved the same way Arti said. We have new people coming in. We have to pay attention to what they're doing. We have to keep them accountable before they sit down, I think, and make sure that people know that they're watching. And I think people, as tiring as it is, we really have to pay attention to who's doing what at city council. You can't depend on kind of local media to tell you that. We really have to figure out who's doing what and follow things as they move along, because sometimes people come, on the Monday that we're voting for something. And sometimes my peers have kind of had their, they'll say, we've been working on this for 2 months. Where have you been? And my goal, my phrasing is always that it's our job to let people know what we're working on. We should not tell them that they have to follow everything we do, but unfortunately that's still the way it's set up. And so that's something that we have to just keep pushing the citizens, for that, weekly accountability from us. And then again, I can't stress it enough, mobilize to have people ready to run for these seats when they come open, because 4 years is a long time, and people pay attention to the federal government as they should. But, I could decide on Monday to increase our parking fees and they're increased the next month. By the time something, happens in DC, it takes forever to trickle down to us. So I know our students from Northwestern have really mobilized and done a lot around our police response to their efforts. They've done a lot of protests this summer. Our police response to their efforts has been not ideal at all. And they've really pushed and done some accountability there. Northwestern has its own police department. So in our little town, we have 2 police departments. And so, there's a lot of work to be done with Northwestern. We don't really work as well with them together on that, but I would say our police are responding to their students. And so they have a right to hold us accountable. And we've done some pushing around there as a city council, but not nearly enough. And probably the attitude we've taken is that the Northwestern students are a pain in the ass, and we really just would like to not deal with them and have their police department deal with them, but that's not the way it works. And so, there's a heavy lift to be had here. I think it's doable, but I think it's going to take a lot of push from our community.
We do have a few questions, and one kind of piggybacks on that, especially the relation between local, I guess, is Northwestern's police department, is it technically a private police department like University of Chicago?
I guess it's private. I mean, I know it's like a registered state, registered or whatever police department, but they don't really do anything off campus, right? And so they only do, and so all of the Northwestern protests that happened were off campus. And so they kind of take like, well, it's not our jurisdiction. And so I've even tried to push that, because I really don't need our police interacting with the students more than we need to. But if they're mobilizing, on city property, then it becomes, a city issue, because Northwestern will say they don't really do things off campus.
So one of the viewers of the webinar today, they asked if Oak Park or Evanston defund in some capacity, and Chicago does not in a similar time frame, would you think there'd be any impact in Chicago, or would there be any impact in Evanston and Oak Park because of the messed up timelines and defunding or reallocating, or however you want to phrase it?
I think, like, from my perspective, if Oak Park defunds and Evanston defunds and Chicago doesn't, like, I actually think that puts more pressure on Chicago. Like, the Chicago, obviously Lori Lightfoot has not been totally receptive at all to things like this, but there is a growing movement in the Chicago Alder and the Chicago City Council for this. I think the impact is actually politically a really important one. If smaller municipalities in Oak Park are doing it before, like Chicago, which has a huge, very long history of racist police violence, right? I don't think, I think one of the arguments that comes to mind is, like, people say, well, we need the police because we're next to the most violent part of Chicago, speaking of Austin, and that's why we need police in Oak Park. But really what we're doing is creating a wall with like, you belong here and you don't belong here because we think you belong, you're coming from Austin and you're not coming from, you know, you're not in Oak Park. And so what we've done with our police in Oak Park is just try and exclude people and try and isolate people. And, you know, it's just not a great way of doing things, which is why I think defunding actually puts more care for the people that, you know, are even possibly coming from Chicago into Oak Park. Like, we're looking at them as human beings instead of people that could be outsiders.
Yeah, and I can't even speak to what's happened in Chicago. I mean, it's a little bit mind blowing that they've, with their current elected body. I mean, I think, you know, again, we're close enough to Chicago that people do tend to think any negative thing that happens in Evanston was a flow over from Chicago. We unfortunately had a young man who our police did kill after he started a kind of shooting spree in Chicago and ended here, killing, I think, 2 people or 3 people here in Evanston. We have a, you know, $40 million police department, and, you know, they weren't there to stop him from, you know, committing these crimes, unfortunately. And it was interesting because people kind of said, oh, he must be from Chicago, right? But after his demise, and we found out who he lived right here in Evanston. And so again, it's this kind of narrative that Evanston, I mean, Chicago is bringing in all the crime, right? But I don't know what would happen. I mean, I would hope that if we did do some major defunding here, that Chicago might follow suit, but it is really its own bear over there. So I have no idea. I can tell you that if Oak Park did something, Evanston would be more likely to follow than if Chicago did something. We don't necessarily, you know, look at them as the model for ourselves, but we do look at Oak Park.
We're like, Evanston did it, so we must do it in Oak Park. That's what we always hear.
The last question I have, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, yeah, you women are doing amazing work. But so I wanted to just ask that question is, what keeps you going and inspired here? You all have connections to social movements and the communities that you represent, but also the communities you're part of, but also being women of color in these positions is, in my view, seems vital, and it's inspiring for a lot of us. Do you want to speak to that last sort of thing to conclude our panel? Like, what keeps you going?
Insanity. I don't know what keeps me going. Just today, I was like, this fucking job. I can tell you that I didn't curse before I had this job. Not as much as I do now. I think what keeps me going, so I'm from here, and Evanston is a weird little beast as well, and it's Black community, in that, you know, if you are Black and you're from here, the next question is like, how long has your family been here? It's like this hierarchy we have of lineage. But I'm one of those crazy people who, you know, from a huge family that's been here, you know, I'm the 5th generation. I'm the 5th person in my family that hold elected office. So I think it's just kind of, and I don't say my blood, but it's what I understood growing up. I understood elected office. I didn't understand other things. And so what keeps me going really is a hope for the city. I moved back here to raise my kids about 7 years ago for them to have high school and middle school here. And so I do have, I guess, in my core, a hope for the city. I feel like we have all of the makings to be really great, but we have to first be really honest. And so I think that's what keeps me going. This will be my last term. I believe in term limits. If 8 years is a lot of time in a small town. But I hope to also like give some hope to other people that they should run for office, even when it's, you know, just drives you batty. So I think this new council, I'm hopeful that we can be productive. I don't know that we will defund. I don't know that we will agree on everything, but I hope we can be productive. I think I started in such a tense time with the council, and I became, you know, very quickly kind of ostracized, that I'm hoping to at least just be more effective. And then I think that from my ward, that gives me hope too. My ward is really, really fabulous. They're just great people here. They're super encouraging of me, even when they don't like something I did. They, you know, they always say, I appreciate at least you talking to us and explaining to us why you did what you did, you know, what you did. And so that gives me a lot of hope. They give me a lot of motivation. And I'm just hopeful to kind of make them feel like they were well served for the time I was here, make people who historically have not felt heard by the government even if I'm the no vote, but I say a piece that speaks to them. I had a really hard vote, was it last month or 2 months ago, about reparations, and that was super hard for me just as a Black person, but it was also encouraging to hear from so many Black people who said, you know, I never come to city council, I never speak up, I don't pay attention, I read this thing. Thank you for speaking up, thank you for representing us. So those kind of things I think give me hope, keep me going.
I think, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about that question, like, why am I still doing this? Because I'm very honest about my struggles with mental health. And to be quite frank, like, I have struggled a lot lately, to the point that like my mental health is now starting to impact my physical health. And, you know, my doctor, not to get super personal, but my doctor actually asked me, she's like, at what cost are you doing this? I was like, well, that's not that great to hear. Because it's been very hard. Like, there is this image of me that exists, and I'm very aware of that. There's this image of me that exists in Oak Park of like this person that just wants to burn down everything and is like, you know, super difficult to work with and like all of these things, which is not true. And I'll actually have conversations with, you know, people privately that will actually say to me like, oh my gosh, this was such a wonderful conversation. Like, you're actually the kindest trustee that we've talked to. Like, I didn't expect that. And I'm like, dang, what do people think of me? Like, it's just such a weird like dynamic to like have to navigate, because I'm just trying to do what I believe we should have already been doing. And like, I think the thing that keeps me going when my family and I, like, especially my, you know, my oldest daughter, who's will be 19, she's like, you know, Mom, you should really think about quitting. Because she sees the impact on me, and, you know, my husband sees the impact on me. I think the thing that keeps me going is the fact that young people are still hurting predominantly. Like, I look at young people and I see their pain, and I want to do something to stop that and, you know, change that. But I also think like the comments from people of just like, I love you, you're awesome, like that shit matters so much. Like, I got that comment from somebody on Monday, and it was just made my day at our board meeting that we had on Monday. And so like things like that keep me going, but also like just seeing the joy that exists in our community when we can have these really difficult conversations and not like tear each other down for them, but like really build community in a very joyful and like long lasting way. Like, that's the other thing that really does keep me going. So I really do hope that, you know, people walk away from this conversation like wanting to know more about defunding and abolition, and not thinking of it as like a negative, but like really looking at it as like, what can we do to like reimagine our community so that we put out more joy and love and peace in the world, and not this like pain and violence that exists right now.
Yeah, the message of hope is really resonates with me. When I read defund stuff and my abolition tendencies, they really are like, they're a demand on people. You know, they demand more of us. We could be more. It really is a hopeful sort of thing. So I want to thank you. You're getting accolades and kudos in the comments. I don't know if you can see that. But I want to thank you for your time. We're out of time, I think, unless Tatiana, you have any other questions that I'm not aware of.
We're pretty out of time, but this was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Very out of time. So yeah, I want to say thank you all for making the time for us and going overtime with us and just giving more of yourself for this. So yeah, we know defund is a process and abolition is a process. And yeah, so hopefully more people are interested, and yeah. And I think you all have hope for very specific things with these new boards and the young people and our communities that we're a part of. And it's a beautiful thing. So thank you again from the bottom of my heart. It's a wonderful thing to be part of.
Maybe I'll say really quickly, even though we didn't get to a lot of questions, there were so many wonderful comments and engaged comments. And I think this was such a wonderful program. And I also echo Adam's thank you. And attendees, the library does send a feedback form. If you have a few minutes, if you could fill it out, it helps us as we continue to plan programming.
And I would say thank you for having me, and thank you to the Oak Park Library for pushing these conversations. I realize you have your own role at the library, so thank you for trying to get the conversation going in your community, and hopefully Oak Park and Evanston will do some good work in the next few years.
For sure. I echo that. Like Oak Park's library board is one of the best boards that we have, and I love the staff. So thank you so much for holding space for this important conversation. And Cicely, I love you. Thank you for thank you for sharing your wisdom. I love it.
Like we
Sorry
all
for,
learned about it.
sorry for the curse words if there are children who might watch.
Let's not speak of it. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
for coming.
Bye, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.